Hi guys, my name is Caitlin and I am the technology tutor at the Carnegie Public Library, courtesy of the Guiding Ohio online program funded by the State Library of Ohio and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. This video marks the first in a video series that kicks off today called Tech Tutor Thursdays, where each Thursday I'm going to release a new video covering a new tech topic. Once the library reopens, I will be teaching most of these classes live in person, but my hope is that you will find these to be helpful and can refer back to them whenever you want. So I have switched over to my PowerPoint here, and that brings us to why we're here today, and that is to learn about identifying misinformation or fake news online. I wanted to kick the video series off with this because with COVID-19, aka coronavirus, and everything going on right now, I think misinformation online is at a high, and it's important that we know how to identify what is fake or sensationalized news from what is truthful, reliable information, and we want to know some good, trustworthy resources that we can turn to help ourselves and each other out to be informed during this time. So let's get into this presentation. In this video class, I'm going to be talking about a few things. I'm going to introduce fake news, talk about what it is, and introduce a few terms that I think are important to be able to identify it. I am going to talk about different things you should consider when looking at information to evaluate it and determine if it is good, trustworthy information, or fake. I'm going to mention some fact-checking websites that you can turn to if you're still unsure, and I'm going to mention some additional tips and some good resources to consult right now for information about COVID-19. So, what is fake news? Fake news is news that is misleading or not based on fact. The intention there is to mislead, misinform, or anger, or simply get a reaction. It can be used to manipulate public opinion. It's often presented in a way that appears factual, and the spread of fake news is increased by social media. Usually we see fake news about hot topics, so currently that would be misinformation about COVID-19 or the coronavirus. The thing with fake news is that those who create it do so with the intention of confusing us, dividing us, angering us, etc. So they like to take advantage of current events and things that already have us on edge, because then they can really manipulate and misinform us, which only makes things worse. So now we are going to briefly talk about some terms that I think are important to be familiar with as we talk about misinformation and how to identify it. So we have this definition of bias. So pretty much bias is a prejudice against something. We all have different opinions, and that is great. But fake news tends to take advantage of people's biases to get them fired up about something. And often they do this by creating sensational or outlandish headlines, also known as clickbait, or reporting things that just aren't true or taken out of context in order to get a reaction from people, which it does. So then we have confirmation bias, which basically means that we are going to look for information that confirms what we already believe, which is logical, right? Most people don't want to read a bunch of information they disagree with. But again, this is how those who create misinformation take advantage of people, because they create their misinformation for specific audiences with the intention of getting that group really mad about something, when really journalism is supposed to be objective or based in fact. So this brings us to these different questions we should ask ourselves when we are looking at information to evaluate it and determine if it is good, reliable information. So as you can see, the questions we should be asking ourselves when viewing information are supporting sources available? Who is the author? When was this information published? Who is the intended audience? Why was this information created? And how is this information presented? Considering these questions will help you to determine if a piece of information is reliable, whether it be a news article, a social media post, a meme, really anything. So first we want to consider, are supporting sources available? Basically, do the facts hold true? Does the author provide evidence? With this one, you want to think about information that is verifiable, such as names, numbers, places, sources, and links. A good place to start can actually be looking at the information and asking yourself, do I see any links in this information? If you do the links work when you click on them, or are they broken? Reputable information backs up its claims with supporting sources, and if the information is online, they will link their sources directly in the article. If they don't do that, you need to ask yourself, is this person just making claims? Can they back up what they're saying? But you can also look at the information and find names, places, etc., and do a quick search of these things to see if they are real or made up. Next, we want to consider the source of the information by asking ourselves, who is the author? But this can also include more than just the author and also mean the publishers, the website, the social media account, etc. Legitimate organizations and news sources will list the author of the information, and then you can search for this author to verify that it's legitimate. Legitimate sources of information will also have easily located about information and contact information. You may also want to think about, is this person or source an expert on this subject? Basically, what authority do they have to report this information? So take the current situation with the coronavirus. If you find a social media post explaining something about the coronavirus, essentially, how do you know that that information is legitimate? Compared to getting information from a reputable source like the CDC or your local public health department, where they are the experts and you know they have the authority in the subject. I'm not saying that all information found on social media is incorrect, but I do think it is important to take some things with a grain of salt and do a bit more digging on the subject. The next thing we want to consider is the context within which the information was created, or when was it published. What current events are happening? What are the current cultural trends or political contexts? Or even, is this information being taken out of context to sensationalize it? But this one is also as simple as, what is the publication date of this information? Is this current information or is it outdated? Is there more recent information to turn to than this? Next, we want to consider who is the intended audience, which is the one that I think ties in most directly to bias and confirmation bias. A lot of misinformation or fake news will be created with a specific audience in mind. The creators of misinformation often do so with the intent of getting a reaction. Whether this is negative or positive, whether it's a call to action of sorts, or they're trying to persuade you, the intent is to get a reaction. So it is important to consider if this information is objective or if it has been created with a specific audience in mind, and this can be done by looking at the language used in the article, the content itself, and even images. These things will be sort of loaded in that it is clear, say, the language was specifically chosen to get a reaction from its intended audience. So why was this information created ties well into audience. We just spoke about misinformation being created for specific audiences, and this is often because the creator has a purpose in mind. So you want to consider, why was this information made? Is the author of this information trying to persuade me to think a certain way? Are they trying to create a call to action? Is there a specific agenda in mind that is guiding this author to create and share this information? These are all things to consider, and it's important to keep in mind that trustworthy information aims to inform using objective information that can be supported with facts and sources. Finally, we have, how is this information presented? And this simply refers to the presentation of the information and can sometimes be the easiest element to spot. So you want to consider things such as style of writing, grammar, spelling, tone, the images chosen, and the layout of the page. But you also want to keep in mind that legitimate information sources will have a professional appearance. There won't be grammar or spelling mistakes. The tone and style of writing will be clear and objective. The page won't be cluttered by ads or pop-ups, and overall there will be a pleasing design. Now I'm going to move on to some additional tips or things you may want to keep in mind when it comes to evaluating information. You want to be aware of your own biases. Biases are perfectly normal, everyone has them and is entitled to them, and so on and so forth. But you do want to be aware of what your biases are so that you can better detect misinformation and seek out ways to better inform yourself on any given subject. Next, you want to do a bit of digging by checking multiple sources. This sort of ties into the previous tip about being aware of your biases because it is always a good idea to read widely and get multiple perspectives on any given subject. This also kind of ties into what I mentioned earlier about taking things with a grain of salt. If you're not sure, if it seems too good to be true, etc., go ahead and do a search and check other sources to see what they're saying. Next, we want to make sure we read beyond the headline. Clickbait headlines will often say outlandish things, but then you read the article and they really don't have anything new to say. So just be sure you're reading beyond the crazy headline. Next, you want to consider the difference between news and opinion and even satire. News should be factual, objective truth. Opinion is opinion. Nothing wrong with that. You just need to be aware that opinion is not necessarily fact. And oftentimes, satire pieces can be taken as truth when satire is intended to be humorous through its absurdity. Finally, if you just aren't sure, use a fact-checking website or reach out to your local librarian. So I am going to be brief here, but here are some examples of fact-checking websites that can be consulted when you're not sure about if a piece of information is true or not. I've included these resources in one of our handouts as well, and those will be available on our Facebook page. But pretty much a couple good sources that you can check out are factcheck.org, snopes.com, politifact.com, or allsides.com. So I think it is worth dedicating a slide of this program to the current state of things with COVID-19, aka coronavirus right now. And I just want to emphasize the importance of consulting those reputable resources like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the World Health Organization, the Ohio Department of Health, and our local organizations such as our friends at the Fayette County Health Department and the Fayette County Memorial Hospital. In general, a good rule of thumb is to look for those .gov or .org websites, as they tend to be more reliable sources of information. On this slide, I have included a list of reliable resources for information about the coronavirus, as well as the phone number for the Ohio Department of Health if you have any questions. Make sure to keep an eye out on the library's Facebook page, as we have been sharing information to help keep everyone informed. And I have a handout of all these different good websites to go to for coronavirus information, and that's on the Facebook page as well. So that wraps up my presentation on identifying misinformation online. Remember, the library may be closed at the moment, but if you have any questions, we are still available virtually. You can shoot us a message on Facebook or feel free to email me about any of your technology concerns until we can meet again in the library. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this virtual presentation, and feel free to send me your ideas for future Tech Tutor Thursday videos. For now, keep an eye out for next week's video, which will be an in-depth tutorial on using library ebooks and audiobooks. Thanks, guys.